Good evening, and welcome to the 27th summer of Chester County's Town Tours and Village Walks. I'm Dan Shahar-Krasnov, and I am Chester County's Heritage Preservation Coordinator. Tonight's virtual town tour would not have happened without the dedicated work of Nancy Shields, Kathleen Hood, Chris Biddle, and Karen Marshall. Karen Marshall, my predecessor, has organized these town tours for the last 14 summers. The program provides the opportunity for the county's historic commissions and societies to showcase local history. This year's town tour focus is Journeying to Freedom, about the abolition of slavery and the Underground Railroad in Chester County. Tonight, 8 presenters will bring to life the time of the passage of the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery, and the period of recovery immediately following the end of the Civil War, in which the civil rights movement encountered opposition from the large non-Quaker population in Chester County. Now, Kathleen Hood will introduce the program.
Thanks, Dan. In tonight's program, Post-Civil War and the Road to Recovery, the last virtual program in our 2021 series, Tanya Thames Taylor will lead us on a fascinating journey highlighting Chester County's African-American sites on the eligible for or on the National Register. Please welcome our conductor, Westchester University professor, Tanya Thames Taylor.
All right, are you ready? Are you ready to go on this journey? We're about to go on this journey. We're about to go on this train journey here in Chester County. Okay, so many people may not know that Frederick Douglass, actually, while Harriet Tubman walked to freedom, Frederick Douglass donned a sailor suit. And if you ever get an opportunity to hear him talk about it, he donned a sailor suit and then he got on the train, because what happens is he had borrowed somebody else's identification, and he got on that train and he literally rode to freedom. What I would like for us to do is imagine this as a railroad, right? We'll be going now on a journey. And on that journey, we're going to go to some fabulous places and hear some fabulous stories. Now, what do you mean by fabulous? Well, to me, as an historian, I think all history is fascinating, because it becomes, this incredible, right, building piece. We can become malnourished when we don't know the truth, right? And so now, at this moment, what I want us to do is to go on this story and to go on this journey. Now, one of the things that the program is dealing with the 13th Amendment. I do want to show something to you, and it really goes into our understanding of what the 13th Amendment actually is. And I want to have the wording for you. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to zoom in more, because I really want you to take this in so you can really get this as understanding what that road to recovery truly is and what it looks like. So right now, the 13th Amendment, we're now at the National Constitutional Center. And so the 13th Amendment says that, you always get in school, it says the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. You go to many websites, it says the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. You all, I want you to know and see and hear words. Now, what happens is the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery, except as a punishment for crime. Now, that's going to really complicate American history for the next 170 years, right? Because what's going to happen is that you're going to now see that except for the punishment of crime, right? You can now have an institution that's like that. And it still manifests in what we call the mass incarceration issue that we have today. So this road to recovery is not something just mere in the 18th century or in the 20th century. We're still on that road to recovery. And so therefore, with that 13th Amendment in mind, now the 13th Amendment was ratified in December of 1865, and it's going to get a whole slew of stories, right? It's going to create an ecosystem, a culture. And again, we're still in that road to recovery. So before I go all aboard to go to our first stop, what I would like for us to also do is I want us to think about, as we're listening to the various talks and various places that I want to go, we're going to travel to today. I want you to look at the education, the churches, the institution, the identity formation, of these Black folks in Chester County. Now, why is this important? Because one of the things that slavery did was stigmatize Black bodies. And it's almost like, well, you know, they're beneficiaries, they're repositories, they're not actors. And so the stories that you're going to hear today, they're actors. And it's very much manifest in one story I want you to understand. So we know that the 13th Amendment was ratified, right, in 1865 in December. Now, I want you to understand that when the United States, our document called the Emancipation Proclamation, which went into effect on January 1st, 1863, that document, of course, we know that what it does, it says, you know, gives those words forever free. But that document also has a powerhouse in it. It creates the United States colored troops. And throughout these presentations and these stops that we're going to go on today, you're going to hear about the United States colored troops. Now, the United States colored troops, you all hear an extraordinary story in American history. When they went and they consigned, and I mean, they joined in, they mustered in, they basically said, okay, yes, we're gonna now go and serve because we want to get rid of the scourge of slavery from the land. So when the soldiers came in, they were paid, they said, okay, they were promised equal pay. And with that equal pay, they did not receive. What happens is they were supposed to have received $10 in a deduction of $3, right? So $7. For the uniform. That was $3 was for the uniform. Well, guess what? The soldiers, right, said no, because white men were getting $13. This road started even during the Civil War, right? And so the United States colored troops, the men said, no, we will fight because we want no one to tell our children their freedom was given to them, but we will not take unequal pay. And for over a year, the soldiers of the United States colored troops did not take any salary, even though their families were dependent upon them. See, that's a story of dignity, and that's a story of creating, and that's a story of being an actor, an agency. And eventually, the United States government in 1864 said, okay, we're going to give you your equal pay, and they paid the men their back pay. So this goes into the story that I want you to know about the first stop. So all aboard this train. And the first stop on this train is a place called Hensonville. So just 1 second while I set up my okay, and on this story to Hensonville, right? So we're going to look at Hensonville, Hosanna, and Lincoln University. They bear witness. And I want you to understand, they bear witness. They change and transform the iconography. They transform the character of this place of Chester County. And I really want you to know that they had agency. They weren't mere depositories. They shaped this landscape. So what do you mean by shaping a landscape? Here, you can see a place that's right there in the center of the map, Hensonville. Now, Hensonville is named after a Black man. Hensonville. This is the map that they had that was created in the 1840s. You can see the rest of the area. It's marked on the map. And so what I want you to take out of that is that here is a village that was created by Blacks in their agency, being independent. They'll say the same place of Hensonville would actually give, and right there, if you go to this a church that's at Hensonville, Hosanna, that is that Hosanna meeting house. That meeting house has cemeteries, a grave there, right? And those were people who participated in the United States colored troops. So in this place of this agency, independent agency, they created not only a town, but a community and a village. And when the United States government called, they went to Westchester, PA, and they right off of Gay Street, and they signed up, okay? And you can see 10 to 12 are actually buried in this cemetery. You can see here the church is very important. We're going to hear that theme throughout this presentations today. And basically, this was free Blacks in the area in 1843. It was the African United Methodist Protestant Church, and they were a stop on the Underground Railroad visited by Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth. Another piece is that when you're looking at something like a Lincoln University was so tied to Hosanna and tied to Hensonville. In fact, it's right, Lincoln University is really on the land of Hensonville. So Hensonville may not be there by name, but it's still there in presence. I want you to check out 2 books to learn more about Hensonville, and that is Hensonville, A Community at the Crossroads, and they both at Chester County Library. Both of the books is here, Hensonville, A Community at the Crossroads, and Hensonville Heroes, Black Civil War Soldiers of Chester County, Chester County, PA. And at this moment, we are now leaving Hensonville, and now we're going to go on another journey. And that journey, the next place on the journey is the wonderful place of Yellow Springs. And so all aboard. Now we're gonna act like we're leaving Cokesville because that's where I'm located, right? And so now we went 14 miles to Hensonville. Now we back at Cokesville. Now we're about to go 11 miles, right? 11 to 12 miles to Yellow Springs. All aboard.
Welcome to historic Yellow Springs. I am Sandy Momeyer, Moore archivist. The village of Yellow Springs, since 1722, spans nearly 300 years of American history. The Lenape Indians built villages here. The spa offered mineral water cures. Civil War orphan children found a home here. The Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts Country School embraced en plein air painting. Good News Productions produced movies. We, Historic Yellow Springs, are proud to state that with this distinguished history of people, events, architecture, a nearly timeless environment, all with historic associations, a lasting impression is enjoyed by all who visit. Because of this, our unique village takes its place on the National Register of Historic Places, as well as being the historic district for West Pikeland Township. There is no village like it. We will focus on our role on the post-Civil War and the road to recovery. The end of the Civil War brought challenges, and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania stepped up to its responsibilities. Chester Springs, village of Yellow Springs, was brought into this recovery period. Pennsylvania Governor Andrew Gregg Curtin had addressed Union soldiers mustered out of Harrisburg at the outset of the Civil War. He pledged himself and the Commonwealth to care for their wives and little ones if they should give their lives for their country in this, and I quote him, great and wicked rebellion. He did fulfill his promise. On Thanksgiving morning, November 26, 1863, 2 soldiers' orphans appeared at the door of the Executive Mansion asking for bread. Governor Curtin realized that the Union had been preserved by the self-sacrifice of the slain soldiers, and he needed to make good on his pledge. In 1862, the Pennsylvania Railroad had offered $50,000 to equip the troops, but the money was not accepted. In 1863, Curtin wrote the president of the railroad to ask if these funds could be used in educating and maintaining destitute soldiers' orphans. The railroad approved. Thus, the Act of 1864 approved accepting the $50,000 from the Pennsylvania Railroad and the state to appropriate the additional funds needed to establish the orphan school system. It was proclaimed, a system the glory of which will resound through the ages. The program was to provide for colored soldiers' orphans. They are listed this way in the documentation, and it was the phraseology used during this time in history. But difficulties existed. The Home for Colored Children at Mason-Dixon in Philadelphia, now part of University City, had some Black War orphan children and was the only institution to which these children were admitted. Finally, the Act of 1867 called for a specific school for needy children of Black troops. Bristol College, near Bridgewater, Bucks County, was purchased and opened for the reception of Black soldiers' orphans in 1868. Enrollment reached 236. It was reported that the school compared favorably with any of the schools in the state. The Chester Springs Soldiers Orphan School also opened in 1868 and could accommodate 300 children. The site included the old Revolutionary War Hospital with classrooms and chapel, the Lincoln Building housing the girls, a library and music room and female faculty, the hall, the brick room today, as the sewing room and infirmary, the hotel, the Washington, housing the boys and male faculty, plus kitchen and dining hall. The Phoenix Messenger reported, "The standard has been raised to such an extent here that it is now regarded one of the best schools in the state." It is interesting to note that Black boys and girls are identified in photographs of life at the Chester Springs School, but no names given. No records are available to document how they came to live here, but they are shown participating in events and not segregated, and all were educated, dressed, and housed in like manner. The principal's reports do identify and describe 2 young boys of color who died while attending our school. Nathaniel Pierce was 9 years old and died in 1910. It was reported that he was never in good health, suffering heart disease. His body was returned to his mother, and he is buried in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. Walter Cuff from Fulton County was 10 years old. It was reported he died of marasmus, which is described as wasting disease. It was impossible to find friends or family of Walter, yet, and I'm quoting, "gentle hands administered to his comfort, beautiful flowers were placed on his casket, and a service was held in the chapel." Walter was then buried at the cemetery at the Vincent Baptist Church. He was given a proper burial along with other children who did not have family to claim them. A granite obelisk marks the site of these graves. Reports tell us that on Memorial Day, the children walked to the cemetery, the brass band played patriotic tunes, and the graves of fellow pupils were decorated with flowers. James Lowry Paul, chief clerk of the Department of Soldiers Orphan Schools, wrote, "It would in fact be within the limits of truth to affirm that the Keystone State has done and is doing more to succor the offspring of her soldiers who lost life or limb in their country's service than all the other states combined." Many of these offspring were given a home and education at Yellow Springs, and all here, white and Black children, were treated equal in life and death. We value this legacy on the road to recovery.
From Yellow Springs to now Longwood Progressive Meeting, 23 miles. All aboard.
Hello, I'm Michelle Sullivan. I'm a board member of the Kennett Underground Railroad Center. Our mission is to educate the public about the Underground Railroad in this area. We also give lectures and heritage tours and provide all kinds of articles and more information on our internet site. When a freedom seeker would make it to Kennett Square, they might have made the assumption that the Quakers would definitely help them. However, there were only a small number of Quakers who would. Much of the local community was conservative, and they did not want to be involved in politics or in breaking the law. And when and if there was kind of a pushy Quaker who wanted to talk about abolition, it would result in their being, as it's called, read out, meaning asked to leave. Enough of those folks were read out that it became necessary to have the Longwood Progressive Meeting House, which is the building that you see. One of the things that the Kennett Underground Railroad did was to have this building recognized and placed on the National Park Service Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. It's one of the reasons that Kennett Square has become known as the hub of the Underground Railroad. And of course, the building has been recognized as on the National Historic Register. There would be people in the community that would help somebody who was a freedom seeker, and oftentimes provide sanctuary and food, and sometimes employment, and then often would help them move further north. Although a good many of African Americans stayed in this area, although it was quite dangerous. There was a small community 3 miles south of Kennett Square. It's called Buck Toe. The next picture that you will see are the ruins of the Parson's house in Buck Toe. When Isaac Mason arrived in Buck Toe, he was surprised to find other fugitives there and a great many African American abolitionists. There were 2 families with the last name Wiggins. Harriet Hood was there and her husband Levi. James Walker was there. There, in fact, were quite a number. And this, in fact, is where I've done my research. The African Union Church, when the community decided that they were going to move to Kennett Square, and that building, not the one that was at the African Union Church, but a brand new building, was placed on East Linden Street in about 1910. There's been a continuous congregation from the time of the original place in Buck Toe to contemporary times. The third picture that you will see is the contemporary picture of the church, which has lasted all this time and has an active congregation, and a very welcoming one too. I'd like to tell you a couple of stories about some of the African American abolitionists that were in Buck Toe. Harriet and Levi had 3 children, and oftentimes the African Americans, if they were poor and could not support all the kids, they would ask a Quaker family to provide room, board, and teach literacy. In exchange, the child might do some light chores around the house. Harriet Hood had more time then to be a very active anti-slavery proponent. She, in an unusual sort of way, was invited to go and serve on a panel that would speak at the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. This was extremely unusual because most of the time, up until a certain number of years, the society was completely white and all male. However, she had been invited to go speak, and speak she did. She also worked with some Quakers at Longwood Progressive Meeting by working in a committee that was, the objective of which was to be raising funds for the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. James Walker, who lived on North Union Street in Kennett Square, also did that work. And in this case, obviously, there was an interracial collaboration. It's important that you know that Kennett Square was a real hub, and there are many things to see here. And secondly, that the African Americans played a very significant role in participating in the Underground Railroad.
Now we're going to go 26 more miles to Devon. And we're going to stay here for a minute.
Zion
All aboard.
Methodist Episcopal Church, in parentheses AME. We're located in Devon. on the corner of Berwyn Baptist and Fairfield Roads, Tredyffrin Township, Chester County. And this church is 172 years old. It was founded in 1849 by some devoted Christians here in the area who saw the need to build a church. And we celebrated, like I said, our 170th anniversary 2 years ago. We are under the pastorage of Reverend April M. Martin, and she was our first female pastor in all of that history. She's a dynamic person, and she's a fantastic, wonderful leader for all of us. My name is Bertha Jackman, and I am the church historian here, and very, very pleased to have that role. This church has, like I said, been around for a long time and has been involved in many different things for the community, the Black community, and the white community. And one of the wonderful, significant pieces in our history was the fact that this church was involved in the Berwyn school fight, also known as the Berwyn desegregation case, or Berwyn segregation case, depending on how you want to put it. 1932, in March, the elementary schools were governed by two townships. Tredyffrin and Easttown were separated at the time, but they decided to segregate the elementary schools, grades 1 through 8. The high school remained integrated. And when the parents found that out through the local newspaper, they decided, no, we also paid taxes for the brand new elementary school that the white children were going to go to, and they said, no, we're not going to stand for this. So many things happened, but just suffice it to say that the parents stood up for their children, the Black children. They boycotted the elementary schools, and quite a few other things. And you can see the history of it on our website. historicmountzionDevon.org. But the point is that they won their case out of court. And the very next day, the school children who were out of school for 2 years went back to school the next day, which was historic in itself. But because of that Berwyn school fight, that was the event that allowed Mount ZionAME Church to be placed on the National Register of Historic Places, because Mount Zion was the meeting place for the Black families and all of their supporters, including the headquarters from NAACP and other dignitaries. Not only we were listed on the National Register of Historic Places in January 2015, this event also allowed us to apply for and receive a Pennsylvania State Historical Marker, which was dedicated in November of last year. And that was another historic day in itself because of the dignitaries that spoke. And all of the speakers were excellent. They provided fantastic information, and the audience was riveted. So we're very, very pleased and proud to talk about all of that, and also to mention that in our cemetery, between this building, the historic Mount Zion Devon, and the new church that we have that went up in 1990, there's a cemetery. And we have at least 21 U.S. colored soldiers, USCTs, in the cemetery, which is one of the larger groups for such a small area. So again, thank you very much, and welcome to Mount Zion at any time. And now I want to introduce you to one of the oldest living people who were involved in the school fight. Remember now, that was 1932 to 34. She just turned 99 years old, and she was a student at the time. Her name is Mrs. Bessie Marshall Cunningham. This recording is with Mrs. Bessie Cunningham, a student of the Berwyn school fight. And my name is Bertha Jackman, church historian at Mount Zion AME Church in Devon, where the school fight meetings took place. What grade were you in
Well, when they let us go back to school, I was in sixth.
Oh, okay. So sixth grade, you went to Pearly School. And that's when the school fight started. And what do you remember about being out of school all that time?
Nothing. Because you know what? I blocked it out of my mind. I didn't want to remember nothing about it.
Do you remember what the little job was that you did?
No, just housework that I knew how to do.
Mm-hmm.
And like scrub the cellar floor
Ooh.
on my hands and knees.
And so besides working, when the school shut down, do you remember any of the kids in the neighborhood that you played with?
I didn't play with nobody. I worked. I got 25 cents for like a day's work.
Do you remember how you felt when you knew you were
I
going to
didn't
go back?
go back. I never went back to school.
Oh, okay.
I was in sixth grade when I left, and I never went back. I found a job and went to work and everything, and then just grew up like that.
Okay.
Because we were very, very poor.
Your sisters and your brothers, were they affected?
I only had one brother.
One brother. So they were not affected by the school fight.
My brother was,
He was?
me and my brother.
So let me ask you this. If there were two things that you want to say about this school fight, if there were only two things you wanted to say, what would that be?
It would be, number one, they had no business to have a school fight because I was just as equal as the white kids that went to school. And I don't figure that they needed to get anything I didn't get because I wasn't no stupid student in the first place. And the school fight wasn't necessary. I was a person as same as the white person, only they called me black and they called them white. But it was no different. And I was smarter than most of them white kids that went, if you're gonna put it that way. So it's just a mean, nasty thing that the white people wanted to do. Really. The God created all men equal. And it didn't say, now you be black and you get different than what the white man will get.
Mm-hmm.
He had no difference between it. He created all men equal. That's what the Bible said.
That's right.
The school fight wasn't even necessary, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know whoever started that you're black and I'm white. I'm a person and so are you. And if you cut my finger, red blood will run out of it, and you cut what they call a white man, or finger the same, not the same blood, because that's my blood, but the same red blood will flow out of his finger as well as it will mine. It's just a stupid thing as they're calling people black and white. There might be a color of your skin,
Mm-hmm.
but God created all men equal, says the Bible.
I know it was a painful part of your life not going to school.
Yes, right. Very.
Because I also remember that you said you didn't tell anybody
What?
about the school fight.
I didn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
Nobody asked me anything. What was I gonna go around with a sign on my back saying, I got a story to tell you about the school fight? Nobody asked. Nobody asked me. I came up with a bad part of life. and everything. But thanks be to Jesus, I'm still here, and I can tell a story.
My name is Jane Kennedy, and I'm here to introduce you and to welcome you to our village here in Carvers Court. And I'd like to just share as a researcher for the project and the journey of getting it on the National Registry of Historical Places. It was such an awesome assignment. And I take great pride, as many of our homeowners and residents, both past and present, and having Carvers Court placed on the National Registry of Historical Places. It was back in 1940 when the United Steelworkers of America, through Lucan Steel Mill, they collaborated with the Federal Housing Agency because housing was a dilemma. And they wanted to make sure that they had the funding and to secure housing for many of the workers that had migrated here in Chester County and in the city of Coatesville to work at the steel mill. And so they worked together diligently to propose to have 100 houses built here for families, or the housing units for families of African-American descent only. And in 1942, the Foundry Street Defense Housing Project was designed by a team of architects from Philadelphia, led by Lloyd Kahn and Oscar Stovanoff and George Howe. They came up to the Coatesville Coalition and worked very close with the Lucan Steel Union to make sure that the designs and the plans that were needed to provide the unique structure of the housing project here in Carvers Court would meet the needs of many families. If you have an opportunity to visit at the University of Pennsylvania, you will see the original blueprints. They're still there. I understand that Louis Kahn, his family, donated a lot of the historical artifacts about Carvers Court and many of his other great ventures to the university because that's where he attended. So if you're ever interested in seeing the original blueprints, by all means, you can go and visit at the University of Pennsylvania. And I was just pleased to have learned that Louis Kahn had also designed the Parliament building in Bangladesh. So, you know, from Bangladesh to the little coal town steel mill town of Coatesville in our community of Carvers Court, which was originally identified as the Defense Housing Project. It later got its nickname, Carvers Court, because it was through a writing contest at the James Adams School that one of the students by the name of Mr. DeVault, he won the writing contest. His name was Russell DeVault. He won the contest at the James Adams School to name the African American Housing Project. So the research was very intense. It took like 2 years to get on the National Registry. We take such great pride in the history, in the oral history that was shared by former residents that lived here, were first-time residents. We still have many fourth, fifth generations of families that take great pride in ownership here in the Carvers Court housing community. And it's just astonishing to have known that this project has so many great roots attached to it through our former past ancestors that contributed so much, not just to the Carvers Court housing community, but to the city of Coatesville at large. One other thing I wanted to say that, you know, when the construction began back in 1943, we learned that it was an old 66-acre farm owned by the Horace Scott family. And I tell you, it was a beautiful place. And the vegetation here is beautiful. Many of the families were able to have farms and they raised pigs, they raised beautiful children. And although there were 100 housing units, there was like one family. Everyone's stories, all the oral history, it just told about the love and the fabric of the families that were woven together to make a beautiful community.
All right, now we're going to go from Coatesville to Hayti, Passtown School.
Hello, everyone. My name is Toni Morton, and I am a member of the Hayti Historical Society. We are currently championing the preservation and restoration of the former Passtown Elementary building, with hopes of repurposing it as an intergenerational community center and museum. This building is in Hayti, which is in Chester County's Valley Township, right outside of Coatesville, Pennsylvania. Construction on the Passtown School building began in 1922 and was completed and opened for Black students residing in Hayti in 1923. That's 98 years ago. And yet the stone construction, front windows, pediment over the front door, and slate roof are still remarkably impressive. For many, this building is the heart of Hayti, a symbol of Black pride and resilience. The Passtown School served the Hayti community not only as an educational center during the day, but during after-school hours, it was the meeting location of various organizations and clubs, and even church services were held in the school from 1954 to 1955. Passtown School also served as a coordination site during the Civil Rights era. This year, the Valley Township Administration and the Police Department moved out of the Passtown School building into a new building, and Passtown School is currently vacant. In her book, The Full Service Community School Movement, Lessons from James Adams Community School, Professor Janita W. Richardson addresses the value and the contributions of segregated schools that functioned in African American communities. Professor Richardson assists us in addressing why listing Passtown School on the National Register is important.
Segregated schools served as a buffer against society bent on thwarting the aspirations and the educational attainment of Black children. Given that the Passtown School is the last of these structures standing in the Coatesville region, we have an opportunity at this moment to preserve the last segregation era Black serving school. Historical edifices connect people with their past and with each other. The recounting of the comprehensive history of Coatesville is complicated and it's layered, and it can be uncomfortable. But discomfort is a good thing when it shatters a false narrative and advances genuine discourse. When historical accounts of these schools do exist, they have a tendency to focus on their deficits and the inequities that were associated with the separate and unequal treatment, as opposed to the strength and the resilience and the resourcefulness that these same schools demonstrated. Thus, Passtown and James Adams add a vivid depiction of how, even in the face of severely limited resources and segregation, a vibrant community school can be created. I think we should stop separating Black history from American history. The stories of Passtown School and James Adams and others are the stories of the Coatesville region. African Americans fought both at Brandywine and Valley Forge and subsequently won their freedom. And given that Pennsylvania ended slavery with a gradual process beginning in 1780, it's no wonder that Blacks began to settle in hamlets such as Hayti and Coatesville and East End. The Great Migration of Blacks to Coatesville began in earnest in 1915 when companies were in such need of workers that they convinced railroads to provide free transportation and then later deducted the transportation costs from the workers' wages. Blacks were critical to the economic life and development of Coatesville, and at the same time were actively excluded from decision-making and the upper echelons of town life. Companies did not go out of their way to provide housing or even provide wages on the equitable pay scale. So what this did was relegate Black migrants and their families into segregated neighborhoods. However, this relegation to second-class citizenship had some unanticipated consequences. Segregated Blacks created entrepreneurship, cohesive communities, and vibrant educational institutions. Coatesville is on the precipice of gentrification, which, as per Stanford professors Wang and Ding in a study that they published in 2020, Gentrification historically has the tendency to disproportionately disenfranchise Black communities from their history and their place in the name of progress and financial gain. It is important for the persons who are authentically associated with the history and operation of this important landmark to determine its rightful historical place. A historical designation will hold space for those vested in this edifice and all the memories it contains to tell the stories they know because they lived them.
Now we're going to leave the city of Cokesville and the community of Hayti to go to Unionville, which is 11 miles away. All aboard.
Hello, I'm Ray McKay, supervisor in Pecopson Township. Chester County has had a long intersection with race relations and civil rights issues. On the negative side, slaves were once held in the county, and the KKK has had a presence. In Coatesville in 1911, Zachariah Walker, a Black man, was burned alive, having been taken from jail, accused of killing a policeman. There have been many positives as well. The Quakers and others began working to abolish slavery. The Underground Railroad was quite active here, with Harriet Tubman leading slaves through the area. Frederick Douglass, John Greenleaf Whittier, Susan B. Anthony, and Sojourner Truth have all spoken here. Future Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall graduated from Lincoln University, and Langston Hughes also attended there. A major figure in civil rights from Chester County was the Quaker Bayard Rustin from Westchester. He helped form the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, and was very instrumental in moving Dr. Martin Luther King to the ways of Gandhi and nonviolent protests. He helped form the Congress of Racial Equality with James Farmer. In 1941, he envisioned a march on Washington to secure civil rights progress, but did not follow up. He did not oppose the Vietnam War as other Black leaders did, but rather only its tactics. The fact that he was openly gay caused others in the movement to have him work more behind the scenes, but his organizational skills and vision resulted in very meaningful progress. Sadly, he did not get the deserved credit at the time. In 2006, the Bayard Rustin High School opened in Westchester. On May 2nd, 1967, Dr. Martin Luther King was invited by the Hadley Fund of Kennett Square to speak at Unionville High School. My wife and I at the time were members of KJAC, the Kennett Area Joint Action Committee. King had been president of the SCLC from 1957 to 68. He had led the March on Washington and delivered the I Have a Dream speech there in 1963. Both of these were earlier visions of Bayard Rustin. At the time of his speech, he was planning a Poor People's March on Washington. He opposed the war in Vietnam and was frustrated by the resources going to the war effort and away from social program needs. At first, his opposition was tempered as he needed President Johnson's support for civil rights progress to continue. Eventually, however, his opposition grew and he began to lose the support of unions, ministers like Billy Graham, and many in the media. His speech was thought-provoking in the least, and you could tell he was frustrated. A year later, on April 4th, 1968, the Hadley Fund invited Philadelphia City Councilman at Large Thatcher Longstreth and civil rights leader James Farmer to speak at Unionville. Dr. King had been shot just hours before the program began. Longstreth was a Quaker, a towering figure, and his Argyle socks were his trademark. He had often worked with the city planner at the time, Edmund Bacon. He spoke about how racial issues negatively impacted progress for the city as a whole. His advice was to be willing to take chances and not be afraid of failure. During his speech, James Farmer was called to the office. He came back as Longstreth was ending. He informed the audience that King had passed away. I remember there being a gasp and quiet for a few moments. Farmer was a skilled orator with a deep, booming voice. He was one of the most prominent civil rights leaders of the 1960s. He had once taught at Lincoln University. He had worked in the administration of Richard Nixon for a time, but quit over disenchantment over cumbersome regulations. He ran for Congress, but lost to Shirley Chisholm in 1968. He had resigned from CORE, which he helped establish in 1966, as it was adopting more radical tactics, which he could not support. He had organized the first freedom rides in protest of the slowness of desegregation on interstate buses. Although we had a prepared speech that night, I'm sure that was never delivered. He spoke from the heart with a booming voice for the need to continue using nonviolence to make true and lasting progress. But he knew that others like Stokely Carmichael had different views, especially that night after King's shooting. In Pocopson Township, the Bernard House, built between 1803 and 1831 in two sections, is being restored. It was the home of Eusebius and Sarah Bernard, who were Quakers and active in the Underground Railroad and in forming Longwood Progressive Meeting. An agreement is now in place with a nonprofit group called Friends of Bernard Station to use the first floor of the house as a heritage center to showcase the family, its activities, and the farming activities on the property. The property would surely qualify for the National Register, but that will wait until this project gets underway.
Now we're about to end our ride in Kenneth Square, and you'll understand why the Harriet Tubman Byway makes sense.
I've worked with Kennet Underground Railroad, and currently I'm part of Friends of Bernard Station, for which we have recently received 501c3 status and are starting an initiative to renovate, preserve, and establish Bernard Station Heritage Center at the home in Pocopson Township of my third great grandparents, Eusebius and Sarah Bernard. I had a very small part working with Karen Marshall in getting the Tubman Byway into Pennsylvania. Chester County and Delaware counties on the Delaware border in southeast Pennsylvania were home to many free Black communities as well as Quaker abolitionists. Quakers were a Christian denomination that took a stand against the institution of slavery early in the history of this country. These communities worked to assist freedom seekers safely traveling along their journey to freedom. Harriet Tubman came to embody the quest for freedom in this area. A significant amount of American experience and history happened here and in the surrounding area from the mid-1700s through to 1865 with the passing of the 13th Amendment. The preservation of that in landscapes, landmark, history centers, heritage centers, and stories of the people involved are of importance. A great deal to learn, acknowledge, and appreciate. The footage you are watching is crossing the border from Delaware into the free state of Pennsylvania to Alan and Maria Agnew's farm in Pennsbury Township. The very location Harriet Tubman herself found safe haven along with 6 men, 3 of them her brothers, and 1 woman in her 1854 famed Christmas escape. The Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Byway is a self-guided scenic driving tour from Maryland's eastern shore through Maryland, Delaware, and into Pennsylvania. Crossing into Pennsylvania, it travels 3 miles up Route 52, Kennett Pike, to Hamilton Village, which is on the National Registry of Historic Places. Then over to Longwood Progressive Meeting House, also on the National Registry, and the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. Then the Tubman Trail to Freedom travels Route 1 and I-95 south to Philadelphia's Independence Mall. This drone footage shows some of the landscape freedom seekers traveled near Kennett Pike, some stopping at Isaac and Dinah Mendenhall's Oakdale farm, or safely crossing through his brother's Springdale farm next door. Both of these farms are also on the National Registry of Historic Places. Some other locations in Chester County on the National Registry include Marlboro Village in East Marlboro Township, the Eusebius and Sarah Bernard House in Pocopson Township, which is eligible for the registry, Kennett Square Historic District, Old Kennett Meeting House in Hamerton, Kennett Township, Primitive Hall in West Marlboro Township, Ursulden Historic Village in East Fallowfield Township, Hensonville, and Fairfield Historic District in Pennsbury Township. To recap some historic items which took place in or near many of these places on the National Registry, here are a few. Area abolitionists near Marlboro Historic District were involved with America's first anti-slavery society, formed in 1755 in Philadelphia, the Pennsylvania Society for Promoting the Abolition of Slavery and the Relief for Free Negroes Unlawfully Held in Bondage. Today, it is known as the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, dedicated to providing educational and informational services. Area Quakers met and lobbied for Pennsylvania Gradual Abolition Act of 1780. Other anti-slavery societies were formed in the 1800s. Abolitionists were often involved in multiple societies, and gatherings were often held at Old Kennett Meeting and Marlboro Meeting until they were told they no longer could meet there, so they went to Hamerton Hall in the period before Longwood Progressive Meeting House was built. In 1853, the establishment of Pennsylvania Yearly Meeting of Progressive Friends, based on moral accountability and practical righteousness, led to the 1855 building of Longwood Progressive Meeting House, a beacon of reform. Participation in the Underground Railroad activities go back into the 1700s in this area. Several farms of prominent abolitionists were stations on the Underground Railroad and are now recognized by the National Registry. I had mentioned earlier that this includes Mendenhall's Oakdale and Springdale farms and Bernard Station. Emancipation Proclamation, which took effect January 1st, 1863, was months after a delegation of 6 from Longwood Progressive Meeting House met with President Lincoln. William Lloyd Garrison hailed this proclamation as a great historic event, sublime in its magnitude, momentous and beneficent in its far-reaching consequences. That's a bit of the history people of Chester County had a part in. Thank you.
Oh, what a journey we have been on. We have crossed over Chester County, and now we are getting ready to go into another exciting part of this. But before we move into the question and answers, I want to say this, and I want to have this perfectly clear. You have seen how African Americans has shaped, influenced this area. After taking this journey that you took today on this town walk and village tour, what you have is that on this symbolic train, what you have is that you have an understanding that in Chester County, right, Blacks shaped the story. You now can't say when you think of abolitionists, you must think of Blacks, because in this area, Blacks were abolitionists right there in Hensonville. When you think about, the soldiers who fought for freedom for this nation after the American Civil War, how can you not now think about the United States colored troops? When you think about, the struggles of school segregation, integration and the like sort, you don't have to travel down south. You stay right here in Chester County and you think about what happened in Devon. You think about what happened at Yellow Springs when in a part of the presentations, you learned about the opening of the school and orphanage for Black United States colored troops children. When you think about housing, when you think about churches, when you think about schools, you cannot deny it. they're there. And so with that said, I hope you enjoyed this journey. And now we're going to again go to the second part of this journey is if you have any questions and answers, please put them in the chat and we will go from there. I do have a question for the panelists, and I want to start off with, because it was several of you who had getting recognized from the National Registry perspective. I want to start off with Ms. Bertha. Ms. Bertha, could you tell us about the process, about how that, that process worked for you? And then Jan, if you would like to come in and you can tell us that, because again, we heard too collectively. So I want you to see when they give an answers, right? This agency, this road to recovery, their answers and putting these aspects on the registry, you understand that that means we're on the road of recovery, right? We're still here. The struggle, you know, freedom is a constant struggle. And so, Ms. Burton, Ms. Bertha. And if Ms. Bertha won't come in, Jan, would you like to share your experience there in Cokesville with Carvers Court?
Yes. Hi. How you doing, Dr. Kine?
How you doing?
I'm doing well. Well,
Good.
it was a journey. It was a lot of bumps in the road. It was a lot of endless sleepless nights, and you know, and with all this information, it was just flooding me. And the way that I discovered it was coincidental in its own right. I kind of was doing some other research and kind of stumbled across this gym that was just lying open in the field here. So it's directly across from where I live. When I look out the window, I see the open field where the community center used to be in the center of Carvers Court here. And that's where all the families would gather together and learn how to sew and learn how to do cannery. And there were many prominent Blacks that lived in this neighborhood that they said was for colored families only. There was so much history and so much oral history of the original Black Buffalo soldiers that lived here in the community, and some of the Black dentists of Coatesville and our Black doctors and school teachers. So it had such a wealth of information. So as I journeyed to it's getting it on the National Registry, it was just like a story, like a movie reel that was just playing out in my head. Because as you all know, as historians and doing research, it was in a time period when I wasn't even born. So to travel back in time, it was very exciting to see the story, you know, unfold and the oral history come forth, to know that this community was just birthed out of just so much commitment and dedication to so many people that had migrated here from the South. And to see the coalition that was organized by Dr. Atkinson himself, you know, to make sure that colored families were given an opportunity to get housing, because it was such a dilemma. Many of our family members and the men that migrated here from the South in particular were living in encampments around the Lucan Steel Mill. And even W.E.B. Du Bois has stated in his research that modern day pigs were living better than some of our Black men that traveled here from the South to get work. So it was very touching. It was heart wrenching at times, but I mean, I just kept plowing and plowing and plowing until we realized that we had met criteria. And for all the people that lend a hand, I want to say Dr. Harry Lewis, State Representative Harry Lewis, and he came right in and he partnered with me, and he got about the business of opening up his office and providing resources so that we can continue to make this community be placed on the National Registry. So it came with great pride. Like I said, a lot of tears. Come to find out that the government, when they invested in this project, it was supposed to be short-lived, but people had a chance after 4 or 5 years of divesting from the project, the government, to buy. So it gave families an opportunity to even take greater pride in the community as they were afforded the opportunity to buy their homes. And to know that even today, we have some 4th generation families that still reside here in Carvers Court, and they take great pride in being able today to know that it's on the National Registry, and all the houses are recorded at the Library of Congress. So many great stories came out of it. And it was just overwhelming at times, you know. Just a beautiful story. And like I said, again, if you come into the development today to see the change and the pride and ownership and the fact that it's on the National Registry, and the 2 years and the tools and the tears that it took to get there. You know, it's a beautiful place to be. I think it's made its rightful place in history.
Let me tell you, so inspiring. And let me just say, I am so proud of the work that you've done there. I am so very proud. And it's so inspiring. I mean, just to hear the story, you now have these stories of, again, agency, right? Like they forged community, they created space, and, you know, just inspiring. We have 2 questions actually that's related. One, we have one from Wayne. I know where Carvers Court is located because I walk there all the time. But what happens is that, could you tell him where in Cokesville it's located? And then also Stacy would like to know, are there any tours that's available about, about Carvers Court, or do you all participate in any type of ongoing piece so the students can know, like from area students, so they can know about this very historic, inspiring, and place that, shows agency?
We're actually located in Coatesville in Cowan Township, right off of Lincoln Highway and 11th Avenue. I mean, we're directly behind the Coatesville Senior High School campus. So it's very easy to get to if you follow Lincoln Highway onto 11th Avenue. And when you come to that fork in the road, you'll see the beautiful landmark signs, the historical and the original sign that was actually pieced together by like pieces of steel from the steel mill. There was a resident here who actually collected pieces of steel from the Lucas Steel Mill, and he hand cut each of the letters to tell the Welcome at Carvers Court story, which was dedicated in the memory of Dr. George Washington Carver. And that's how they got its nickname, Carvers Court, because it was originally Foundry Street Defense Housing. But it got nicknamed Carvers Court because of the dedication from many of the students at the James Adams School who wrote oral letters and different contests that were going on with, I think her name was Mrs. Anderson. She asked her students, let's dedicate, and name the new Color Family Project. And they wrote stories. And the one gentleman, he won the essay. Let's dedicate it to the memory of Dr. George Washington Carver. And that's how we got our nickname, Carver Court. Beautiful stories, Buffalo soldiers walking right here. And we were a part of the original town tour a couple years ago, and people did come through. We had quite a few people come through. I did work with the Coatesville Senior High School with their historian group. So they did bring a couple students out on tours. So anytime you want to bring a group out that are interested in touring the area, we went around Carvers Court, we told the story, and then we ventured over into Coatesville, over to the Palmer Park area where it was the first Black dentist in Coatesville that they dedicated the Palmer Park to. And they got to see the infamous wall at the community center, which shows a lot of our Black historians, and the Atkinson Memorial Center. And then there's called the Black House, which is the old Episcopal church, where it was a place where Blacks were welcome to come and talk and have community meetings and come together. So it's like a whole historical district there. It's a big place and time. It is.
It is. And you know what? It is so wonderful. That's why the location of Carver Court right there by Cokesville area senior high, if students if they go home catching that road, that back road, they're going to can't help but to go by Carvers Court. And let me tell you something, a gem and treasure you have in Carvers Court. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
For memorializing what you did. And and your team and everyone, but thank you so much. You did a service to Chester County. Amen. So the next question that we're going to go to now, I have a question for Tony. Tony, when you were preparing for this presentation, what was some of the things that stood out for you, and what did you want to sort of highlight? What was the experience like?
The experience was very enlightening for me. We knew the Hayti Historical Society. We knew that we have a treasure here with Passtown School. But what we visualize is not what the township may visualize. So part of the struggle is hopefully getting the township to understand that this is a Valley Township treasure. Putting together the documentary was relatively easy because of Dr. Richardson and her involvement in telling the story much better than I could. But it's something that if we don't do it, it's not going to get done. And I think that's one of the most important lessons that I've learned personally, that this is our charge. It is our turn now to do what our parents did, and that is fight for the community.
And fighting and struggling and, you know, shaping and telling that story is what you're doing. Reality is, when we live in this nation, narratives are important. And one of the pieces that in your interview, this the woman who was assisting Passtown, she said, we must get rid of false narratives. And the false narrative is that Black people were not owners and shapers, not only of the history that's associated with them, but mainly the history of this nation. We would like to now thank you all for coming. Thank you for participating. Thank you, panelists, for asking questions. Thank you for giving all of your energy. Let me tell you something, a great service has been done, and I'm giving rounds of applause for it. And now I'm going to turn it over to Nancy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for the wonderful presentation. We hope you enjoyed tonight's Chester County Town Tours and Village Walks program, Post-Civil War and the Road to Recovery. Our special thanks to our presenters, Tanya Thames-Taylor, Sandy Moimar, Michelle Sullivan, Bertha Jackman, Jane Kennedy, Tony Morton, Ray McKay, Lorraine Lucas, Chester County Heritage Coordinator, Dan Shakar Krasnov, Nancy Shields, and Chris Biddle of the Chester County Planning Commission, Suzanne Amrich and Kathleen Hood of the Chester County Historic Preservation Network, and of course, to all of you for making this program possible.
This concludes our 2021 Town Tours and Village Walks virtual programs, but there is still one more tour left to enjoy. Next Thursday and Saturday, August 19th and 21st, live tours of the Welsh Baptist Historic District and the Mason-Dixon Line will take place in London Britton Township. Also, look for the CCHPN Fall Series starting on Thursday, September 16th, when we host the Women at Warwick Furnace, Iron to Lavender. Please know that all of us have enjoyed the privilege of exploring the rich history and heritage of Chester County with you in 2020 as well as 2021, and we wish all of you the very best. Good night.